Hunting or Bust, The Journey Onward by Master Atlan in Chapter 11, Swallow That Pride. John sat in his chair impatiently while looking down at the large presentation stage in the Grim Studies class. He had watched Professor Port wheel out a large black cage as something snarled and growled menacingly inside the bars. He gulped and leaned towards his partner beside him. Pyrrha, did Weiss just volunteer to fight a Grim? Pyrrha nodded. Yes, John. She indeed volunteered to fight the Grim. And she smiled before looking back down towards the stage. I'm actually quite excited to see how she performs. She always seems to carry herself with a composed and focused mind, and she proved she was a valiant. She has a variety of techniques and abilities in the battle against Nevermore. I'm sure she will make quite quick work of the Grim. John still had a conflicted expression as he still seemed confused. He asked, yeah, but isn't it dangerous? Of course it is dangerous, Pyrrha answered him in total honesty as she narrowed her eyes at the rumbling cage. She continued, anytime we choose to fight a creature of the Grim, we put ourselves on the line, but that's the task we have taken upon ourselves. To face our fears so we may overcome them is one of the first tasks we must conquer to become the first line of defense against the darkness. And John still didn't seem very comfortable with the idea of the white-haired Harris facing one of the terrible beasts by herself. Pyrrha looked over and saw the concern in his face before she smiled. There's nothing to be worried about, John. Weiss is a strong fighter, and Professor Porritt will no doubt be watching diligently at any time in case he is needed. After a moment, John had a weak smile and nodded in agreement. Yeah, you're right. She'll be fine. Woohoo! We're gonna see some fighting! Nora cheered from her seat, waking herself up from her nap in anticipation of a good brawl. Ren tried to calm his friend's excitement. Nora, please don't yell. We're still in class, and don't be so excited about a fight one of our friends might be injured in. Oh, stop worrying, Ren. Weiss is a big girl. Well, not really big because she's actually kind of small, but you can be tough without being a big guy or girl. Anyway, she was pretty tough with all the Grim yesterday, so she'll be fine. Probably. Maybe. I should have brought popcorn. She then jumped out of her seat. Yeah, battle! We come for the whole seat before we only need the edge. Most of the people looked at the orange-haired girl as she whooped and cheered. Pyrrha and John Stanley looked up at her in surprise before looking towards Ren. As he lowered his head, he looked towards his team. She really likes watching wrestling. Mr. Diddles! Woohoo! Naruto was shuffling in his seat, not as excited as the ginger girl across the aisle, but still eager to see some action. He tapped his hands on the desk. All right, this is way better than some stupid lecture class. His smirk fell into a mild scowl. Man, I should have raised my hand quicker. Stupid Weiss getting picked first and having all the fun. Tenten in confused shock. You'd really rather fight a Grim than just sit down at a desk peacefully and take notes? Naruto immediately answered, Yes, I would. Any day of the week. Tenten nodded her head, deciding not to pry and just accept her teammate's odd personality. Tenten sat up in her seat and waited for the Harris with the scar to return from getting changed into her fighting clothes so she could duel the Grim. She spoke up to her team. How fast do you think Weiss will beat that thing? Can she beat it? Kiba groaned as he rested his head on his arm in boredom. She's a princess. They're not usually made out for fighting monsters. I mean, she's whiny, loud, and can't seem to focus on one problem without complaining and blaming it on someone else. Kiba shook his head. Plus, you can't fight in a skirt and heels. Don't judge book by their cover, Kiba, Sasuke said with a contemplative look on his face from the edge of the row. You'd be surprised what will happen to your expectations if you keep them so narrow like that. Yeah, Naruto agreed. I mean, sure, she was kinda whiny, but she fought pretty well, even in heels. And she's really partner, and she's trust her, so that's all I need to know. She's strong. Kiba shrugged his shoulders. Okay, whatever. Tenten looked at the wild-looking boy in confusion before looking over at her partner. She saw the focused look on his face. Are you thinking about how she'll fight it? Sasuke shook his head. I'm thinking about why she wanted to fight in the first place. The door on the lecture stage opened up, and Weiss walked out in her signature white outfit and rapier strapped to her waist. She carried herself with a regal, clear-headed, and confident air as she stopped on the door end of the stage away from the rustling cage. The tense silence was broken by her teammates suddenly cheering her on. Yang roared, Yeah, kick butt, girl! Blake nodded and smiled. Show us what you can do. Ruby cupped over her mouth. Yeah, kill it, Weiss. Show them how great Team Ruby really is. Weiss just rolled her eyes in annoyance and tried to ignore her spirited partner's cheer. Pud raised his weapon that was a mix of a battle axe and old blunderbuss. He looked towards the young lady. Are you ready, Miss Schnee? Weiss responded by pulling Mortonaster out from her side and raising it up to her fencing stance, ready for battle. The professor nodded. Then let the battle begin. He swung his axe down and destroyed the lock on the cage. The cage fell open to reveal the large form of a Borbertusk trot out. It slowly moved forward, looking around and surveying its new surroundings as it spotted people moving back into their seats in worry. It then looked forward and spotted the white-haired girl standing there facing it. It started running its hooves over the stage before darting forward and letting out a guttural roar. Weiss stepped to the side and avoided the Grim while slashing her rapier over its body, but to no avail. It swerved and dashed at the white-haired girl again, but Weiss jumped over it and made sparks as her sword clashed against its bone-like armor. It turned around and started wildly waving its tusks back and forth to rip up her legs, but Weiss continued to jump away from danger. Go, Weiss! You can do it! Kill it already! As various people started to yell and cheer, Weiss ignored them and continued to focus on the Grim in front of her. She pulled her sword back before lunging forward with a thrust, but the Borbertusk leaned down and pushed the tip of her sword back in with its armor. Weiss stumbled back and the Grim charged forward, but the Harris somersaulted out of the way. As she landed, Weiss waved her rapier and several blue glyphs started appearing around her. She flicked her sword and white blades of energy started flying towards the Borbertusk before it curled up and started spinning towards her while leaving a trench behind it. The white blast impacted against the Grim's armor without any notable results and forced Weiss to dodge to the side and avoid any injury. Weiss narrowed her eyes and growled in anger at the results she was getting in this fight. If she wanted any real results, she needed to strike its belly where there was little armor protecting it. Weiss, hit its underbelly. Aim for its stomach. Knock it over. Kill it already. Throw the thing all over the room and into the sky before crashing it back into the ground. Nora, she's not going to do that. She shook her head and tried to ignore her classmates yelling before turning around to attack the Grim again, but the Borbertusk had already run up behind her and slammed his tusk down on her sword, forcing it out of her hand and to clatter against the marble stage. Weiss gasped and stumbled back before the Grim swung its tusk into her stomach and knocked her across the stage and against the ground. Several people groaned in sympathy with her pain. Weiss pushed herself back up and heard the professor speak behind her. Well, Miss Schnee, you have been disarmed. Do you wish to yield the fight? Weiss shook her head and focused herself as the Borbertusk started spinning and launching itself towards her. Weiss ran forward and dove out of the way as it nearly slammed into her body. She hurried to her feet and ran towards Mortonaster, but the Grim cut her off again and forced her back. She was cornered and nearly to the wall as the Grim started tapping its hooves on the marble and ready to attack again. Come on, Weiss! Stay calm! Ruby yelled. Weiss, you need to get your weapon back! Wait for it to run and... Ruby! All of you! Weiss yelled in anger at the class. Shut up! Everyone shut their mouths and sat back in their seats, Ruby especially feeling self-conscious about being yelled at by her partner. The Borbertusk spun towards her and the Harris jumped on top of Port's desk and over the Grim as it broke through the desk and slammed into the wall. Weiss landed into a roll and picked up her sword before kneeling down and forming a large silver glyph in front of her. The Borbertusk pulled itself out of the wall and looked back to see Weiss on her knees in the middle of the floor. It started spinning again and charged towards its prey before passing over the glyph and being launched up into the air by surprise. It let out a horrible shriek as it flailed around in the air before Weiss spun up to her feet and swung her rapier one last time. Another silver glyph appeared over the Grim before launching it back towards the ground at the same velocity. Weiss stood up and held Mortonaster over her head as the blade pierced the Grim's stomach and broke through the other side. Weiss stumbled to the side and let the Grim's body fall to the ground before she pulled her blade out of the corpse. She was panting lightly as Port and the class started clapping for her. Well done, Miss Schnee. Well done indeed. Exquisite. Rather unfortunate that you had to destroy my desk in the process, but still very good work. Calculating, passionate, and with a flair of the dramatic. Keep it up and you will no doubt become a hunter of great skill and prowess, not unlike myself. Weiss nodded her head. Thank you, Professor. That's it for today, everyone. Port announced as the students started getting out of their seats. Keep today's lesson and experience in your mind until I see you all again. Remember to read chapter 1 and 2 in your books. We have books. And I hope you all enjoyed your first day at Beacon. The class started flooding through the door, and Weiss followed not long after. She rubbed a hand over her face tiredly and sighed before she heard her young leader's voice catch her ear. Weiss! Hey, Weiss, wait up! Weiss stopped and rolled her eyes as Ruby ran up to her with a hesitant smile. That was a really good fight you had. You were so cool with those simple things and magic and stuff. They're called glyphs. Right, sorry. Ruby felt nervous as the tension around the white-haired Harris was palpable even to her. She started rolling her foot along the ground before asking, "Hey, we were going to meet up with everyone else in the cafeteria for dinner. Do you want to come?" Weiss was silent for a moment before shaking her head. "No, I'm going to get some fresh air." She turned around and started heading towards an exit. "I'll see you back in the room." "Wait, Weiss," Ruby interjected before looking at her partner in confusion. "What's wrong with you? You seem angry. I'm not the same kind of angry you usually are. And why did you yell at us during class? We were just trying to help." Weiss didn't answer and stayed quiet before sighing. She turned around and shook her head. "Ruby, do you think you're ready to be a leader?" Ruby was silent and blinked a few times before tilting her head. "What are you talking about?" "I'm asking you if you're ready to be a leader. The responsibility of leading a group of people through fire and danger and into victory. Do you think you're ready for that?" Ruby was surprised by Weiss's intensity on the matter and thought hard about it. She hesitantly spoke up. "Well, I think I'm ready." "Really?" Weiss interrupted before pointing at the class that just finished. "Because it didn't look like you were taking it very seriously in there, considering you were playing around and yelling like a madman." Ruby was caught off guard by the truthful accusations and lowered her gaze in shame. She whispered, "I thought you were going to trust me to be your partner from now on." Weiss closed her eyes and calmed herself before looking at the younger girl. "Ruby, I know how hard you work, and that despite how you act, you are actually a surprisingly competent fighter. But being a leader is different. You are in charge of leading a group of people, understanding what they can and can't do while making sure you can cover for what they are unable to handle themselves." Weiss turned around and started to walk away. "Until you understand the responsibility you've been handed, I'm not sure you're ready to lead anyone." Ruby stood there in silence as Weiss walked down the hall and out of her sight. The red-hooded girl slumped her shoulders and sighed as she sadly looked down at her own boots. Just as she felt like her and her stubborn partner had taken a step forward, she just pushed 2 steps back and told to stay there until she grew up. Ruby was a little ticked that Weiss would say that she wasn't fit to be a leader yet. She was totally ready. She had killed Nevermore and an alpha wolf yesterday, along with her team. How much more ready to lead did she have to be than that? But a very, very, very small part of her was agreeing with what the white hairy said. Naruto had run up from around the corner and saw Ruby standing there by herself. He tapped her shoulder. "Ruby?" This startled the shorter girl. "Huh, what?" "We're all waiting for you guys down the hall." Naruto looked around but didn't spot the white-haired ice queen anywhere in sight. "Where'd Weiss go?" "Oh, she's not hungry. She told us to go ahead." "Oh, all right." He started heading back down the hall before looking back at his younger friend that was still stationary. "Ruby, what's wrong?" "Nothing. I'm coming." "Hunting?" Weiss slowly wandered around the large balcony on the side of the school as the sun started to set. She closed her eyes and started slowing down before plopping her butt on a bench. She propped her head up on her hands and elbows and looked towards the sun with a far-off gaze. She sighed and shook her head. "How did this happen?" "Are you asking, or are you just being rhetorical?" "Hey!" Weiss shrieked as she jumped out of her seat and away from the bench with a hand on her chest. Standing behind the bench with his hands in his pockets was a raven-haired swordsman of Team Noctix. He was waving at her. "Hello again." "Oh, it's you." Weiss took a deep breath and fixed her skirt before trying to regain her unflappable state. She coughed before asking the boy, "What are you doing out here? Shouldn't you be eating with the others?" "Well, I saw how peeved you were after class and fighting the Barbotusk. I guess I can understand after being yelled at by most of the class while you were trying to concentrate. But then I heard you arguing with Ruby and stormed off out here." Weiss raised an eyebrow. "Are you following me?" "More like worried about what's troubling you," he inquired. "So what's wrong?" "I don't know how well you think you can read a person, but my thoughts are none of your business." Weiss huffed as she started walking away. "And there's nothing wrong, so don't bother trying to read into anything." "Okay, but I'm willing to listen with an open ear, and I don't think it's a good idea to go back to your room if you're upset with Ruby." Weiss stopped in place. Her shoulders were shaking before she hung her head and sighed. She turned around with a slight scowl. "Okay, fine, if you insist." Sasuke had a small smile on his face after convincing the rather stubborn girl. Weiss sat back down and started to explain her thoughts and hesitations about the youngest member of the team being the leader of their group, and while Weiss complained, Sasuke stood by the bench with a welcome ear. Weiss finished off. "So now I'm questioning if Headmaster Osman was right in choosing her for the position of leader, and if she can truly handle the duty placed upon her properly." She let out a long sigh at finally being able to convey her worries before looking up at Uchiha. "So, do you have anything to say about that?" Sasuke contemplated and rubbed his chin in deep thought. He grunted and answered, "I think you're worrying too much." Weiss just groaned and hung her head. That's what I get for trusting a stranger with my worries. Look, what this all boils down to is your thoughts that Ruby isn't ready to be a leader. She's not, Weiss replied. She's immature, impatient. She doesn't pay attention in class. It's not what's to be expected in a leader. Sasuke crossed his arms. So do you think you're more capable as a leader? Are you angry that it wasn't you that was picked? Yes! Weiss immediately pulled back. No. Weiss looked down at her lab with a guilty shame as she shook her head. I don't know. Sasuke put his hands on his hips and thought for a moment. Weiss, from what I saw of you fighting yesterday, you're definitely in the top tier of students in the first year. Quick, lots of skills, a bit stubborn and hard to work with. Hey, but nothing you can't work on, or nothing you can't work around if you tried. He shrugged his shoulders. But just like you have different quirks and ways to deal with things, Ruby probably has her own ways too. You just need to give her time to show it. But she's just a child. Not much younger than us. Technically, we're all kids. Weiss narrowed her eyes. But don't you think Ospen might have made some mistake along the way? I mean, you seem more like a leader than that buffoon with the rag. Weiss didn't know Sasuke very well, but from the first impressions, he seemed like a very collected individual. He carried a calm confidence that didn't dip into arrogance, and he appeared very skilled, given the fact that he had dodged an alpha wolf swipe to carry her across a bridge in an instant without hesitation. Sasuke gave a slight nod. Well, I can't argue that Naruto is an idiot sometimes. Actually, most of the time. And you still think he's ready to be your leader? Sasuke sighed for a moment and thought before he looked at the Harris. I've known Naruto for some time before we came to Beacon, and to be honest, when I first met him, I didn't hold him in very high regard. I mean, I lowered the bar really, really low for what I expected of him, and sure, he was reckless and stupid, but he never let me down. He stuck by my side through a lot of hardships, and now it just feels natural to run by his side. Sure, our leaders might not be the smartest, but maybe what we need isn't cynical genius that can lead us through every scenario possible, but instead, we have someone that can run by our side and help us through everything. Weiss looked up at him as the sun started setting behind them, and the falling lights spread their shadows across the balcony. A conflict came across her face, and she asked, but can they really lead us through everything all by themselves? Well, that's the thing about being on a team, Weiss. They're not all by themselves. Sasuke smiled as she looked up at the large towers of the academy with a fond expression. We help them through what they can't handle by themselves, and in return, they will help us when we can't do it ourselves. Because I think Ospen saw something in them that we usually can't see. Something that will surprise us given time. We just have to have a little patience. Weiss blinked in surprise as she looked up at the raven-haired boy. Sasuke rubbed the back of his head and started heading towards the door back into the hall as he spoke up. Just think about it, and give her another chance. Weiss watched him walk back inside, and she stayed seated in the bench as the sky started to darken. She leaned back in her seat and thought about Sasuke's words and the conversation they just had. Hunting. It was late at night and most of the lights across the campus had been switched off. Weiss walked up to her room dorm and looked down to see that there was a faint light emanating from under the crack of the door. She pulled out her scroll and unlocked the door before quietly pushing it open. The rest of her team had fallen asleep peacefully with a lamp illuminating Ruby's bed from the headboard. The light wasn't enough to deter them from sleeping, as Yang and Blake were bundled up beneath their comforters while Ruby slept over her covers and with one of her arms hanging off the side. Weiss was honestly surprised they were able to sleep so soundly considering their beds were hazardous to their lives, but that didn't matter right now. Weiss slowly walked over and stood on her bed to get a good look at Ruby's bed right over her. The young scythe wielder had lulled herself to sleep after reading a variety of large books that were surrounding her resting form. She was so out of it that there was a bit of drool coming down her chin, and she was snoring lightly. Weiss shook her head before gently shaking her partner's shoulder. Ruby! Chocolate pancakes. Ruby woke up with one of her eyes half lidded. She looked around absently before seeing the Harris standing by her bed. Weiss? Ruby stared smugly with the book and picked one up. I wasn't sleeping. I was reading. The book is upside down. Ruby flipped it. I was reading. Sure. Weiss tapped her hands again against the rim of the bed before stepping down. I'm going to make coffee. Ruby blinked in surprise. Huh? Weiss walked over to the coffee maker she had bought for late night sessions and started brewing a new batch. She poured it into a mug and picked up the sugar. Is 1 spoon enough? Ruby was so surprised by the kind action Weiss was taking that she almost didn't hear the question. A little more. Weiss added another spoon. Ruby held her thumb and forefinger together. A little more. Weiss added another spoon. You know what? I'll just tell you when. Weiss raised an eyebrow at her before sighing and picked up the whole dispenser. She tipped it over and poured a mountain of sugar into the coffee for several seconds. That's good. Okay, I'm going to have to make sure your teeth don't rot out before this year is over. Weiss picked up the cup and ran over to the beds before stepping up and handing the younger girl her drink. Ruby gratefully took the mug. Thanks. Weiss and Ruby were silent for a moment, the sleepy girl taking a few sips of coffee to keep herself awake. Weiss spoke up. Ruby, yeah, I never really expected a lot from you as a leader. Oh, thanks. No, what I mean is that was how I felt earlier. See, being a huntress, I've wanted to be one all my life, just like you. Weiss leaned more into the bed as she relaxed and started telling Ruby the truth. I came to begin thinking that if I followed a certain plan and path without any faults, I would become a huntress no problem, being partnered with you and put into a team. Well, I'll admit that wasn't part of any plan, and now that all that has changed, I don't know what to do. Weiss chewed on her lip for a moment before shaking her head. But that's the thing. You can't control the future, and I can't predict how it will turn out with you as the leader. Ruby looked at her oddly. What are you saying? I'm sorry about what I said earlier. You might be a little rough around the edges right now, but that doesn't mean that you can't be a great leader, and I'm sure you can be, because despite everything that's been against you, I have seen that you can do amazing things when you want to, but I want you to know you don't have to do anything too big for yourself. I'll help you, so will Yang and Blake, because that's what it means to be on a team. Weiss was silent for a moment before an honest, kind smile came over her face. And we wouldn't be a great team, Ruby, without our fearless captain. Ruby blinked in surprise before a smile grew on her face. She nodded. Yeah, thanks, Weiss. Weiss nodded and stepped down before moving to the bathroom. All right. Well, don't stay up too late. I'll see you in the morning. Hey, Weiss. Ruby looked back as Ruby asked, are you sure you weren't just jealous that I got top bunk? Weiss just stared at Ruby for a good long time before an almost invincible smile came over her face. Just a little. Weiss continued and closed the door behind her as Ruby sat up and drank her coffee. Sugary. Hunting. Would you both like to explain to me what this is? Professor Port inquired as he held up the crude drawing of himself that had been passed around during yesterday's class. Ruby sweated. It's a doodle. Not to try to save them both. It's a caricature, sir. You know, one of the funny drawings at festivals and piers and junk. Then would you like to explain why you both were passing it around yesterday during my lecture? Port asked sternly, raising one eyebrow so high that it disappeared underneath the rest of his mop of silver hair. The two students were stuttering and babbling as they tried to defend their case after class, while students stuck around and watched. Yang sighed and shook her head. This is what they get for losing track of their doodle. They gotta learn to keep a tight hold on that stuff. Blake sat against the row of desks and asked her partner, was it such a good idea to sign their names on the back like it was a piece of art? Yang shrugged her shoulders. I don't know. I think they were just so proud of it they didn't want anyone to forget they drew it. Weiss blinked surprise. Wait, how did Professor Port get a hand on it? Don't know, but now they're paying the price. I guess they won't be drawing pictures during class anytime soon. You guys don't know Ruby. Weiss was confused by how Ruby and Naruto had gotten caught before she caught sight of Sasuke and his team watching Naruto being admonished by their teacher. As Tenten stifled her laughs and Kiba cackled, Sasuke looked up and saw Weiss look down at him. He smiled and winked before looking back at the punishment for their fooling around. You two, while I must say I'm honored that you would try and capture my image in a drawing, I must say that your artistry is sloppy and poor at best. Port fixed his collar and stood up proudly. Why, I remember a time when I was a young man and I had to help a renowned artist create a large variety of masterpieces for an exhibit. Ruby and Naruto's eyes widened when they realized where he was going with this long-winded story. They shook their heads. Professor, you don't have to waste your time telling us a story. Naruto agreed. Yeah, we actually gotta head to our next class and... Nonsense! This won't take long. He grabbed their shoulders and forced them down into chairs before he started recalling the story. And now, once I had to gather up a variety of muds and clays so that they could be used for exotic paintings, something about giving the picture an earthy feeling or whatnot. Anyway, Ruby and Naruto were shaking in their seats with tears in their eyes as their teammates and friends laughed silently. They all started to walk out the door as their leaders silently begged and pleaded for them for help. They just waved goodbye before walking out and leaving the slackers to their punishment. Weiss actually giggled lightly as she left. She would start believing in her partner and help her because a great leader that could handle everything she faced. And Ruby's first lesson would have to be taking responsibility for her actions. End of chapter 11.